Giuseppe Verdi's Un Ballo in Maschera, or in English, A Masked Ball, is one of my top 3 favorite Verdi operas. And lately I've been asking myself why. I mean, why not La Traviata, Aida, or Rigoletto? Operas that are much more commonly produced and that are more generally popular. Why not Nabucco, which was a great hit for us? While not one of the standard repertory items, it certainly has become more popular of late because of its stirring choruses. Or why not Don Carlo, an opera that people in the opera business seem to cherish beyond words? Well, there's something about the music of Ballo, and the music, after all, is what attracts me to opera. Maybe that's true of you as well. Some people are attracted to the stories, the sets, the costumes, perhaps even the overall experience of making a special evening out, culminating in a glittering night of theater. But for me, it's always going to be about the music. When I start thinking about how I was going to talk to you folks about the music of A Masked Ball, I was initially hard-pressed to figure out what I was going to say to you. Because is it the melodies that attract me musically? Well, you know, Verdi has a great way with melody. But this opera isn't one of those operas like Traviata or Aida that have a lot of melodies that have become part of the commercial sphere. Melodies that are memorable like this. Or like this. It doesn't have that popular cachet. Is it the power of its orchestration, the instrumental colors? Well, yes and no. Yes, because the orchestra is treated by Verdi in a brilliant way. But also, no, because the orchestra is not treated any differently than it is in any of the operas that Verdi wrote during that time. Is it the voices? Not really. You can hear a similar combination of soprano, tenor, mezzo-soprano, and baritone in any number of Verdi's other operas from this same period. So I kept thinking, and finally, I came up with it. It's the rhythm. Yep. It's maybe a strange thing to say, and I can't say that I've ever heard anyone else say that it's the rhythm of the music in an opera that draws them to it. It's usually the case that people's ears are attracted to the great melodies in opera, that which lies on top. But there is something very special indeed about Verdi's approach to rhythm and rhythmic drive in this opera. And why is it so attractive in this opera over one of the other operas that Verdi wrote and that I know and love? Well, for one thing, I can't think of another opera that has such a diversity of rhythmic ideas within a single scene or a single act. I also think it's because he uses rhythm in this opera to help tell the story and create a sonic environment for the characters to live in. It's the responsibility of the composer to set the stage, after all, to use the music to tell us where we are, what period of history we're in, whether the characters are old or young, good or evil, whether when the curtain goes up it's morning or evening, things like that. Yes, music can tell us all those things. And it's not just the melodies that tell us that. In A Masked Ball, through the rhythmic choices Verdi makes, he tells us everything we need to know about the story. Let's take the first act, for instance. We're in 18th century Sweden, in the glittering royal court of the king, Gustav III. So imagine you're in the royal palace in Stockholm, a throne room filled with glowing chandeliers and mirrors reflecting their light. Everyone is in their finest court attire, brocade coats in rich and vibrant colors for the men, uniforms for the guards, silky gowns for the women. The king is decked out in his finest court uniform, a gilded sword on his waist, a dazzling ceremonial emblem perhaps hanging around his neck or pinned to his breast. The architecture of the room sweeps our eyes up to the top of the proscenium, where we might see mounted a royal crest in purple, white, and gold. Well, that's a great verbal description of Act 1, right? Yeah. So we know what it looks like. What does it sound like? When the curtain goes up, it's morning in the royal palace, and the court awaits the appearance of the king. The first thing in the text is the courtiers singing about the king's sleep, hoping that it was good and restful and that he had happy dreams. This text is communicated by Verdi through a sustained rhythmic idea that flows very easily, undisturbed, just like the king's sleep. But there are elements in the court that are plotting against the king, who don't like what he's been doing politically. Those men are there as well in the courtroom, and as soon as we've finished listening to the supportive courtiers, we hear from the plotters. Now I'm going to ask you to use your ears to pay close attention to something. We have here two completely different rhythmic ideas, one that's peaceful, hopeful, and one that's brimming with tension. Verdi places these two ideas side by side in order to point out the two different factions in the court. One faction made up of the king's friends and advisors, the other made up of those who would like to be rid of him. Note, all of this is done without a change in tempo. The changes in the character of those two rhythmic ideas, they reflect the two sides of the court, and they take place through purely rhythmic means. Let me play these two ideas while beating the tempo with my right hand. You'll see the tempo doesn't change. Here's another good example of Verdi's use of rhythm to define a character. It's the character of the king. His entrance is announced by the page, Oscar, and we get a completely new rhythmic idea, something akin to dance music. Listen to this. Why don't we get something perhaps more, well, regal for the king? I think it's because this king, Gustav III, is young, intelligent, active, and as we'll see later on in this same scene, rather a fun-loving kind of guy. We even get some syncopation in one of his statements here in the beginning of scene 1, where he talks about his power as being necessary to help promote the freedom of the people. That's about as regal as this king gets. What's especially interesting is what happens rhythmically when the king asks his page for a list of the names of the guests invited to come to the upcoming opera ball. He sees on the list the name of Amelia Angerstrom, the wife of one of his closest advisors and the woman that he secretly loves. Suddenly, as he sings an aria pouring out all of his feelings for this lovely woman, the rhythmic ideas change yet again. Here is the orchestra that underpins this aria, just playing the accompaniment. And you tell me what you hear. Do you hear a heartbeat? If you do, you're definitely in sync with Giuseppe Verdi. Quite often in opera, when a character is singing about love, you'll get a rhythmic figure in the accompaniment, in the orchestra, that sounds like a heart beating quickly. And that's exactly what Verdi does here in order to communicate the king's feelings. Where's the melody, you ask? Well, it's there. I just didn't play it for you. So here's a recording of the king's entrance through a bit of the aria so that you can see how all these rhythmic choices help to set the scene and tell the story. I'm purposely avoiding the melodic choices Verdi makes in order to help you listen a little bit more deeply. You won't be able to avoid those melodies in this recording, but try to use your ears to hear at that deeper rhythmic level. Feel it in your body, in your fingers, or in your hands. Try to imitate it. Tap it out on a table or on a desktop. Those rhythmic choices say as much, sometimes perhaps even more, than Verdi's melodic choices do. Let's listen.
Avresti alcuna beltà dimenticato?
Ecco che nomi!
Amelia, adesso ancora, adesso ancora. A lei la vita ogni grandezza obblia. La rivedrà nell'estasi bracciante di pallore, e qui sonar d'amore, la sua parola udrà sonar d'amore.
So, in that excerpt, does the king sound young, vibrant, active, like a lover? Absolutely. Let me give you one more example that is completely different. The first utterance of Ankerstrom, Amelia's husband, and he's the closest confidant to the king. The rhythmic idea that Verdi gives to this character could not be more different than that which he gives to the king. The courtier approaches the king to warn him that assassins are plotting to kill him. The king makes light of this information, as we would expect. But Ankerstrom insists and bursts into an aria of some seriousness, offering his advice in the midst of this political turmoil. The rhythmic pulse in the aria is steady, firm, almost march-like. It also has the character of an underling approaching his superior, probably because it is so different from the rhythmic pulse in the music of the king, his superior. Listen to these first few bars of Ankerstrom's aria, just the accompaniment without the melody that he sings. Doesn't that capture the character of a subservient courtier? Maybe I'm hearing something that isn't there and using my imagination too much, but you'll certainly agree that the rhythms at the core of this character's music is quite different from the rhythms that are at the core of his king, right? Let's listen to a recording of a bit of this aria so that you can see the text as well as hear the melody that Verdi gives him to sing on top of that rhythmic idea I just played for you. Listen down, underneath the melody. Tap that rhythm and see if it doesn't communicate something of the character of this good friend and supporter of the king.
Alla vita che t'arrive, di speranze gaudio piena, d'altre mille vite, il destino s'incatena. T'è perduto bella patria, t'è perduto bella patria, col suo splendido avvenir.
So that's it. Creating opera is about making choices at all levels of the music, not just the shape of the melodies, which are often the first thing we hear in opera, because after all, that's what the voices have to sing, but in the shape and character of the rhythmic accompaniment underneath the voices, what the orchestra plays underneath those beautiful melodies. And sometimes, that's where genius lies. I'll see you at the opera.